Welcome to Essential Libertarianism, selected readings from voluntarist.com. Essential Libertarianism is voluntarism. Let's reclaim the anti-political heritage of this philosophy together. The essays and books we read in this show will bring us closer to the state-free voluntary society that we desire. Let's begin the journey.
How Murray Rothbard became an anarchist, not a voluntarist. Production note: the following audio was taken from a YouTube video. The audio runs from 26 minutes and 42 seconds to 51 minutes and 8 seconds of the video and was taken from a speech he delivered at the Libertarian Party convention in Denver in 1981. Here's Murray Rothbard.
So about the same winter of 1949-50, this is, I guess, 2 or 3 months later after my conversion to Austrianism, I became an anarchist, and I can remember exactly what happened. It was pure logic that did it. I used to argue with 2 or 3 very close friends of mine who were liberals, who were very intelligent. We'd have sessions sitting around arguing constantly, right? And we had a similar session in my house. I remember that very, very vividly. And we had usual arguments. About 3 in the morning they leave, because as many of you know, I'm a night person. And 3 in the morning sort of just about average for breaking up an evening. And I thought to myself, I think something important happened tonight. What the hell was it? And it wasn't just like the usual argument. And I thought the thing over. I realized what it was, because one of them said at one point, because I was in favor of laissez-faire. I was a pure minarchist, laissez-faire minarchist, okay. And they, of course, were regular liberals. And they said, look, why do you favor government supply police force and courts? What's your justification for that? And I said something like, well, the people get together and they decide that you can have this monopoly court system and monopoly police. And they said, I think very intelligently now, they said, well, if the people can get together and say that, why can't the people get together and set up a steel plant and a dam and all the rest of it, right? Why can't they set up all sorts of other government industries? I thought to myself, I said, by God, they're right. I came to the conclusion that laissez-faire was inconsistent. That either you had to go over to anarchism and scrap government altogether, monopoly government, coercive government altogether, or else you have to become a liberal. Of course, since it was out of the question for me to become a liberal, that was it. That was my conversion. Then I started reading up on this stuff, anarchist writings and libertarian writings, et cetera, and broadened my perspective. But that was the essential. That was a tremendous winter for me. It was a winter of a double-barrel conversion. First to Austrian economics and second to anarchism. I remember, let's see, then there's also in Columbia Graduate School, where I still was located. Of course, I used to have arguments with these people all the time. At one point, interesting thing happened, which stunned my liberal associates. They said, look, here you are, an extreme right-winger, which I considered at the time, extreme right-wing crazy, anarchist or whatever, and we got to meet you up with Whitey. Whitey was the Communist Party leader on the campus. He was sort of a thuggish type, with turtleneck sweaters, 6'8" or whatever. I mean, in that stratosphere, who knows what the height is? A menacing-looking figure in general. So we got to get you together with Whitey. So they introduced me they set up a meeting on the street on Broadway. So, and they figured they could get out fast, you see. And they introduced me formally. It was kind of sweet. They said, we introduce Murray Rothbard, here's what it was. Whitey, whatever his name was, who was the outstanding Marxist-Leninist on campus. And here's Murray Rothbard, who was attacking Senator Taft for having sold out to the socialists. And then they figured that would be it. Then we, pummel each other to death, and that would be they get rid of 2 extremists. And oddly enough, what happened was that Whitey said, "Oh, an anarchist, that's great." And so we shook hands. We had a very friendly discussion in which Whitey tried to prove to me that the way to achieve the withering away of the state is by maximizing state power. And I thought that was a little kooky. So And my liberal friends were totally confused. Why are these people conversing even? Why aren't they hitting each other over the head with clubs? And so that was one interesting ideological experience. The other interesting, I think, another interesting political point was when was this? Yeah, about this time. I had not, of course, the Libertarian Party not yet existed, so I was not yet politically pure in the sense of politically, organizationally pure. And the 1948 campaign, I supported Thurman for president. Thurman was the states' rights candidate. Okay, there was a little club on Columbia University campus called Students for Thurman. It was a very small club, as you might expect. And this was during the height of political action. Most of the people there on campus were Henry Wallace supporters. Others were Truman supporters, and 2 or 3 Dewey supporters, and here I was a Thurman supporter. So the Students for Thurman, I remember, had one meeting. And the meeting, there were 4 or 5 members and about 12 or 13 hostile observers trying to find out what kind of evil racism is going to be promoted here. And most of the people who got up and spoke were sort of, Southern states' rights types. Didn't have much to say. And I got up, here's a New York Jewish lad, I guess I was on a passion plea against centralized government for decentralization. I couldn't understand this at all. Anyway, the Students for Thurman Club did not flourish. That was my one experience with it. At any rate, we had, as I say, about 6 or 7 people or something in this little circle Bastia. We got along very well. I think it was very happy times. Small in number, but pure in spirit. And arguing, as I say, about arcane matters, and never about strategy. I remember also then about this time was the first time in my life I ever got red baited. It was a big new experience for me. I mean, now those of you who think I'm a commie now, it's nothing to it, but I consider myself an extreme right-winger. Okay, this is the old right. The Republicans or the right-wingers were semi-libertarian in those days. They were anti-military intervention, they were anti-conscription, they were in favor of the free market. And so I consider myself sort of extreme version of this. Okay, so I wrote a column for obscure little magazine called Faith and Freedom, which nobody's ever heard of, I'm sure, here, and was written. It was a very good, actually, very good libertarian magazine for its day. It was written for right-wing Protestant ministers. That was the market that they were writing for. The people writing it, it was a sort of a culture clash, and. So I wrote the Washington column. I succeeded Chodorow. One of my proud moments is when Chodorow left Washington column. I became the Washington columnist, even though I'd never been to Washington at that point. And I wrote it under a pseudonym called Aubrey Herbert, and for various obscure reasons, which I need not go into, unimportant reasons. At any rate, this was the beginning of the Eisenhower administration. So I had a lot of fun attacking all sorts of status plans of the Eisenhower administration, attacking the idea that we should spend every drop of American blood supporting Chiang Kai-shek and things like that. I was having a ball. And the editor comes flying to the east. Before that, 6 months before, he said I was doing a great job, great writer, and all that. He comes to the east and he said, I have to fire you. I said, why do you have to fire me? I thought you liked... That's not the point. He said, our constituents are writing letters calling you a communist. These are the right-wing Protestant ministers. So I was kind of stunned. It's the first time I've ever been red baited. I'm now, of course, used to it. It made much difference. But it was a culture shock. So at any rate, I said, but since I spent all the time attacking the government, how can I be a communist? Since communists are in favor of all-out government ownership of everything. But logic was lost on the editor because he was just interested in his constituents. Fortunately or unfortunately, divine retribution struck, and the magazine folded about 3 months later. Well, I guess let's see, what brings me up to about middle or late 1950s. Let's see, I guess I should, okay, the late 50s, let's say, before that, it was essentially, those of us who were libertarians, again, I guess it was about 5 or 6 or 8 or whatever, consider ourselves extreme right-wingers in this spectrum context. Then what happened was the right wing was taken over and changed dramatically by National Review, 1955. And for various reasons, one because there was a power vacuum, because the old leaders had died off, like Taft and Colonel McCormick. It was easy for the National Review to take over and sort of change the whole picture into what the right wing is now. The right wing in those days was not theocratic, it was not pro-war or pro-conscription. So anyway, the face of the whole right wing was changed, at which point those of us who had considered ourselves extreme right-wingers had to start leaving the movement, leaving the right-wing movement. And it was a painful break, as these things usually are. I wrote quite a few economic articles and book reviews for National Review the first few years. I was pretty appalled by those days with the new right, and split with them about 1959 or something, about that period. My best friend there was Frank Meyer. He was a very interesting character. He was the book review editor and general theoretician for National Review, now dead. Another very, very charming chap. He was extremely erudite, intellectually exciting, libertarian in many ways. He was great in the public school system, hated the guts of the public school system, even hated private schools. And as a result, he raised his kids himself, which is a heroic act, as probably many of you would realize. And he's pretty good on most things. Unfortunately, he was weak on one particular topic, namely nuclear war. He was all in favor of it. To give you sort of a feel of what National Review was in those days, it probably still is, but I haven't had any contact with him in a long time. Frank and his wife Elsie were also a very charming person. The two of them used to argue bitterly about what the foreign policy move should be. Okay? Frank was in favor of immediate nuclear attack on the Soviet Union. Okay? Elsie wanted to give them 24 hours to resign before we attacked them. That was the matrix of the spectrum of opinion on the right wing, of the new right. So we did not politically see eye to eye, obviously, for a long time, after the first few years when I found out what was going on. The other thing that struck me about the new right was the monarchistic aspect. Remember, many sessions or cocktail parties, and the big argument would be something like this: should the Bourbon monarchy be restored first, or the Habsburgs? So, it's not the sort of thing I can relate very well to. It was even worse than agricultural metaphors. So what happened was, after the small growth in the 40s, in other words, after finding the movement in the middle of late 40s, and then sort of having some intellectual companions, whatever, in the late 50s, we're back in square one again, more or less, by 1959 or 60. Also, libertarians in that period were swinging in a pro-war direction, also, whoever they were, mostly was swinging in a pro-war direction. One of my close friends, who was an original member of the Circle Bosnia, Robert Schuckman, who died a tragic death very early, was the first chairman of the Young Americans for Freedom. To give you an example of YAF's spirit in those days, it probably still is. The founding meeting in Sharon, Connecticut of YAF, okay, there was a small libertarian contingent. This was the beginning of the Libertarian Conservative Alliance. Not me, but the other people. And they suggested the term Young Americans for Freedom. The trads, who were really the majority, traditionalists, said, no, we can't use the word freedom because it's a commie word. To me, it sort of symbolizes the right wing from then on. Freedom is a commie word. Okay. But Schuckman was able to prevail, I guess, with some of the cooler heads like Buckley and get the thing started. So we had a situation then by the early 60s. I had to start battling on the foreign policy front, both with libertarians as well as other people. And there was when the Vietnam War started and the draft, of course, this made the thing much more intense, the whole problem. And Leonard Liggio and myself founded Left and Right, which I guess 3 times a year publication. I don't know how to say it, triannual or whatever. And we figured nobody was reading it. I mean, we had some subscribers. Unfortunately, we were so ill-organized that we never cashed anybody's check. So, at any rate, as a result, we had a heavy deficit, you can imagine. But we figured nobody was reading it. It turned out later, after the magazine died, a lot of people seemed to have been influenced by it. But that's the sort of thing that happens in writing. Writing is sort of like putting a note on a bottle and putting it out in the ocean and hoping somebody reads it someday. So it'll be very surprising to find out a lot of people have read it. So with this position of being anti-war and anti-draft, certainly on the war question, a position which split us totally from the right-wingers, who then again accused us of being commies for the second and not the last time. We really arrive at the famous YAF split. In other words, we get to the point in '69, I guess it was. All of a sudden, libertarian types pop up at YAF, and you will hear, I'm sure, at the SIL party, more discussion of this. And I wasn't really close to that because the YAF split happened in St. Louis, where I wasn't apt. I did contribute to the split by writing an inflammatory 4-page article in Libertarian Forum, which I just founded in '69 to replace left and right, saying, listen, YAF, urging them all, calling upon the splitless evil organization. Apparently has, once again, blowing my cool, but seemed to have a certain amount of effect. At any rate, apparently YAF was split, of course. So the big issue being the draft, the conservatives or the trads at the YAF convention being horrified and appalled when one of our people, one of the Libertarian Caucus people in YAF, burned his draft card openly, at which point they try to lynch him. And another thing is our people at St. Louis were shouting laissez-faire while they were burning the draft card, and the opposition, the trads, were shouting lazy fairies, and which you can, again, shows the mentality of these people. So with the meantime, in the Libertarian Forum had been founded, one, because left and right was running too many deficits, and two, because we figured that with the Nixon administration coming to power, and this has certain parallels right now, of course, many libertarians at the time thought that Nixon was going to be the savior. He was going to bring liberty to America. I swear it's true. Several friends of mine who have by this time become Nixon advisors were claiming Nixon is really a libertarian. As a matter of fact, some of them said Nixon was really an anarchist. I get that. They said, Nixon's one of us. You'll see. Right now, of course, because he's a politician, he's running for office, he has to pretend he's left-wing and statist and all that. But you'll see, boy, when he gets into office, you'll see what he'll be. He'll take off the gloves, come out of the closet. Of course, we did see, to our deep regret. But this, as a matter of fact, I coined a little quip at that point. Nixon was one of the pioneers in the idea of having special interest groups for Nixon, like writers for Nixon, housewives for Nixon, et cetera, et cetera. So I wrote a thing saying there should be a group called Anarchist for Nixon. At any rate, there was, I guess, quick disillusionment with that. But we founded the Libertarian Forum largely because my publisher and close friend Joe Peden believed that we should have a voice pouring out into the public, whoever reads it among the libertarian public, pointing out that Nixon is not really a libertarian, goddammit. And that's really how it got started. While about the same time the YAF split was going on, we started supper clubs in New York, Libertarian Supper Club. There is now a Libertarian Supper Club, which is very successful and peaceful. Our supper club was successful, but not very peaceful. This was during the Nixon repression period. Okay, so we figured out that the meetings in my living room were getting a little too large. I have a pretty small living room. The living room is legendary, but it's small. Okay, so we decided, why don't we have a supper club? We hire a Chinese restaurant or something nice and cheap, and have a meeting and just announce it and have somebody reading a paper, whatever, some short thing, having a discussion. So we did that. We met in a Chinese restaurant, rather seedy but very good Chinese restaurant on Broadway and 100th Street, 103rd Street, something like that. And we thought we'd get about 30 people, right? We got about 80. This is the beginning of the sort of big libertarian growth. Where did these 80 people come from? Who the hell are they? Well, some of them, unfortunately, were police agents, at least one. Because what happened was that you have to realize these meetings were extremely innocuous, right? I mean, my friend Leonard Liggio gave a paper on the history of classical liberalism, okay? The next morning, this is Saturday night, the next morning we had a contact. We had one student group at that time at Fordham University. It was our big student libertarian group, one and only. Maybe it was another one somewhere. And the people at Fordham knew the head of YAF, it's New York State YAF at the time, it was very friendly at Fordham campus. So Saturday night, Leonard Liggio gave a little talk on the history of classical liberalism. Okay? Sunday morning, the AF guy would call up my friends at Fordham and say, here's what happened last night. Leonard Liggio gave a paper, the following people attended it, and he reeled off a list of attendees. He got that from his police spies, he was friendly with the New York City Police Department. So that was the sort of atmosphere. Now, they didn't do anything particularly at the point, but I guess we felt we were on the cutting edge of the revolution. Then we decided the supper clubs were fairly successful, getting 80 people. We did something very daring, and if I turn on retrospect, it'd be pretty crazy. And we issued a call, okay, in Libertarian Forum. Come one, come all, first Libertarian Convention. This was Columbus Day, 1969. Everybody show up for this mammoth thing, okay? We expected we'd get about 200 people. We got about, 400 or something like that. Who are these people? Never saw them before. Usually never saw them later either. It's very strange. The whole thing is very strange. Really phantasmagoric because, first of all, we held this thing in a notorious commie hangout, commie hotel in Times Square. The reason why we went there is it was the cheapest hotel we could find. We're not the affluent movement we now are, right? This is the old, this is the old days. So there's a place called the Hotel Diplomat, which has very cheap meeting rooms, etc. So we had these scholarly papers and everything, stuff like that. Then we found peculiar things were happening. Like all of a sudden we'd stand outside, somebody would pop up with a flashbulb and take our picture. Or somebody would swagger up and say, with a sort of obvious shoulder holster bulge with a crew cut, "Are you one of those anarchists in there?" And we'd say, "Anarchists? Who's that?" We've never heard of it. We're just standing here going to a restaurant. So anyway, that was the situation where it was sort of almost a police bust. They didn't quite get to it, but it was sort of close to it. Also, the people there were we never saw these people. It was a very strange and motley group. Don't forget, we used to have 8 people in the living room with 20 people. Here we find a tremendous spectrum of libertarian variety, ranging from people walking around with capes with dollar signs on them to people with black armbands, rather weird-looking types with black armbands, and who kept constantly shouting, "Kill, loot." So it was not a close meeting of the minds in this convention. It probably turned off more people, set back the movement quite a few years, I think. At any rate, that was where we had to learn through experience and all that. Obviously, it was the essential learning process. So we've now come, I guess, to the early days, 1970. This is 69, a year or two later. I guess I should talk about the first publicity of the movement. What happened is that the fall of 1970. Okay, the campus revolt was taking place in 69 and 70, basically, all the burnings of the buildings, whatever. By the fall of 70, the whole thing had died out very, very fast. Okay. So the New York Times was looking around for something to write about. And they went to the campus. They couldn't find any political activity. They went to Columbia University the year or two before, the heartland of sit-ins and burnings and all that. Couldn't find any political activity at all, except one peculiar group called the Freedom Conspiracy. Who are these people? Never heard of them before. Freedom Conspiracy was the only active political group on campus. It was 1970. They were in favor of Jim Buckley for Senate, a deviation which fortunately has now been corrected. And they're a weird group because on one hand they're talking all this stuff about laissez-faire and free market. They're also very counterculture types. And things with black flags and so forth and so on, long hair and all the rest of it. So the New York Times felt this was a very interesting phenomenon. They wrote a little article about it. And then 2 or 3 months later, the New York Times Magazine section, which was extremely influential in the media and general opinion groups, wrote a front-page article. This is the early 1971, with a picture of these guys, the 2 leaders, Stan Lair and Lou Rossetto, with a black flag and whatever, and anarchy written on the back and so forth and so on. And a long lead article on this strange new group called Libertarians, and they're in favor of John Locke and and so forth and so on. And this is the first time, I think, the modern libertarian movement got any kind of media publicity. And it kicked things off because then there was op-ed pieces about it. And what happened then was that they asked me to write something about it. And I got an argument with Buckley, as usual. And from that, they asked me to write For New Liberty. So the whole thing begins to snowball. And of course, about that year, later that year, the Libertarian Party was founded. So I think, since you're all, of course, familiar with the history of the party, you'll hear much more about it from the founding members that were really here in person in Colorado. I'll end my reminiscences and nostalgia at this point, as we've now brought up to the modern current period, and brought you from the antediluvian period of my birth all the way up, all the way up to modern times. So thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to Essential Libertarianism. You can check out the archives of all of our episodes at essentiallibertarianism.com. And you can subscribe to future episodes on any podcatcher, including Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Play, and more. This has been a Pax Libertas Productions podcast.